So another important aspect of Alzheimer's disease that hasn't gotten nearly as much attention is that it appears to be a type of diabetes of the brain, that there's a problem with glucose metabolism in the brain. And the earliest reports I've been able to find of this was published in a German medical journal, Dr. Siegfried Hoyer, who first reported that there was decreased glucose uptake, glucose levels, and lower cerebral metabolic rates in the brains of some people with dementia. And he and his associates went on to study this. They have studied this for many years and published many articles about glucose metabolism, insulin resistance, and other aspects of this problem in Alzheimer's disease. And other groups throughout the world have as well. But I wanted to focus just on one group here from Brown University, led by Dr. Suzanne Delamonte. And they looked at the brains of people with advanced Alzheimer's disease who did not have type 1 or type 2 diabetes. And what they found was that the levels of insulin and factors related to making and using insulin are greatly reduced, that all of the signaling pathways involved in the use of energy are abnormal, and that the functioning of mitochondria is abnormal in Alzheimer's disease. And they coined the term type 3 diabetes. This was in 2005 to describe the insulin deficiency and insulin resistance in the brains of people with Alzheimer's. This group went on to study at the brains of people at various stages of the disease, and they found that it was present in the very earliest stages and that it became more progressive and more widespread throughout the brain as the disease progressed until it was very severe in the last stages of the disease. So there's a fundamental problem in Alzheimer's disease of getting glucose into the brain, and it's not just insulin resistance and insulin deficiency. There are reports that there's a deficiency of the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, and also deficiencies of GLUT1 and GLUT3 glucose transporters that get glucose into the brain and into neurons. So it seems like there's a conspiracy of getting glucose into the brain and brain cells of people with Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Cunnane showed a similar slide when he spoke the other evening. And here on the left is a normal brain, and the yellow and red areas are areas of glucose uptake, and blue is where there's very low uptake. And you can see in the Alzheimer brain on the right that there's a considerable reduction in the amount of glucose taken up in the brain. So glucose PET scans have been done on people as early as their 20s that are at risk for Alzheimer's disease, who are clinically normal at that time. But they show that there is already decreased glucose uptake as early as people in their 20s. And it's been shown over and over that this problem appears to occur possibly decades before the onset of symptoms. So we know that glucose is the predominant fuel for most cells, including the brain, in the normal fed state, and especially when on the typical diet, especially the typical American diet. However, during starvation, humans easily switch over to using alternative fuels after glucose stores are used up, and these include amino acids and lactate by way of gluconeogenesis, fatty acids, which are used by muscles, cardiac muscle, but do not cross the blood-brain barrier, the long-chain fatty acids, and ketones, which are produced in the liver from fatty acids, which do cross the blood-brain barrier and can be used by the brain as alternative fuel. So the brain has metabolic flexibility. It can very easily switch over from using glucose to ketones to create, end up making ATP. So the question then becomes, could ketones bypass the fundamental problem of getting glucose into the brain by providing alternative fuel in Alzheimer's disease? And the first publication, the first person that I have read of who has suggested this is Dr. Richard Veitch of the NIH. He's been studying, he's a MD, PhD, and he's biochemistry is his forte. He's been with the NIH for decades, and he began studying ketones in the 1990s. And he did a study in which they had cultures of neurons to which they subjected toxins that cause Alzheimer's disease and cause Parkinson's disease. And in some of the cultures, they had beta-hydroxybutyrate, the ketone body, and in other cultures, they did not. And what they found was that there were many more surviving neurons in the cultures that had beta-hydroxybutyrate. So he has been developing a ketone ester basically since the 1990s with the hypothesis that, that raising ketone levels could potentially, and using them as alternative fuel, could bypass this problem of glucose metabolism in the brain of people with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, ALS, any number of other neurodegenerative diseases. Congestive heart failure could improve the cardiac. It has. They showed increased. Let's see, how do you put it? Work of the heart in prior to this study. Anyway, so around 2000, he published this, and then 2001 to 2003, he began publishing some hypothesis articles, and Dr. George Cahill published articles with him. Dr. Cahill had discovered that the brain uses ketones as alternative fuel during starvation and published this in the 1960s. Dr. Theodore Van Italy, who is 96 now and still publishing, he published a hypothesis paper about the use of ketones. They're all colleagues over the years. Dr. Van Italy had discovered that medium chain triglyceride oil, when taken up by the liver, is partly converted to ketones. So they all believe firmly that ketones could be used as alternative fuel to bypass this problem of insulin resistance and problem of getting glucose into brain cells.